All right, well, it's 6:31, so probably time to start getting rolling here. If you haven't joined in here and you're registered, go ahead and do that now.
Yeah.
We wait for them.
Yeah, I suppose we can give them a couple more minutes or seconds or whatever we want to
That's
do.
just a funny joke.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, no, we put this webinar together. I think it's pretty timely and pertinent information as far as the time of year that we're in right now. It's spring, grass is growing really strong, and so it's time to think about getting your livestock onto grass. And so we're going to go over a lot of rotational grazing scenarios, some fencing things, some pasture management as far as improving it. And so it should be a pretty good little webinar. If you've got questions, we've got a question box pulled up there in the chat. Feel free to type in those questions whenever you want. Alex and I will watch that and answer those. So with that, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Justin Fruechte, and I've been with Millborn Seeds for about 12 years now, and I'm a forage and cover crop specialist. And Alex, why don't you introduce yourself too?
Yeah, so I'm Alex Guttormsson, also forage and cover crop specialist here for Millborn Seeds, and going on, well, just over 3 years now here, helping guys out with farm, ranch, forage, and cover crop questions. So been pretty fun.
Perfect. All right. So just a real brief introduction. We got a couple slides here on Millborn Seeds. If you're not familiar with us, we've been around for a long time, since 1987, and so you know, it's been a company that's really focused on all the other seeds in the industry, the small seed industry, a lot of grasses, pasture grasses, turf grasses, conservation grasses, and then we certainly deal with a lot of cover crops now too. Your annual cover crops for soil health, grazing, livestock misfits, forages, alfalfa. So we do have a real big crew here. There's about 37 full-time teammates now. We've been growing, we expanded and opened up another location out west near Rapid City in Blackhawk, South Dakota. And we've got 3 awesome guys that work out there. This location here is 85,000 square foot, and it's a beautiful big building, and we're actually just expanding on, so we have more storage. The cover crop thing has really pushed that as far as growth, expansion, and need for that. And so happy to build on and expand this warehouse and try to help fulfill more needs of customers that need seed right now, and ensuring that we always have it on hand. So that's Millborn Seeds. I think it's just it makes sense to try to give you a little bit of a basic introduction as far as the agronomic characteristics of grass, and it's probably important to know that so that we manage those to the best of our ability. I think the fun thing to remember here is if you could, you know, draw out a grazing plan, theoretically, you would graze every grass 1 week before it heads.
Right. Yeah.
It's certainly not possible, right? With different kinds of grasses in our pasture. We've got lots of different species out there between grasses and broadleaves, everything too. But that's how you would do it if you could for the health of the grass.
Absolutely. Yep. And this one thing to keep in mind too is like that's the peak time where tonnage and quality go together. And I know Justin's going to get to that in just a second here, but it's kind of a tight window. And I mean, we're not always able to do it, but that's what we're really targeting for. It's trying to maximize production per acre.
Correct. Yeah. So quality is always better as that grass is immature before it goes into a reproductive stage. And so depending on what you're trying to accomplish with that grass, or with your livestock, I should say, will also dictate when you want that, or where you want that stage of the grass to be. So all livestock will eat grass from the top down. Okay. Seems like small ruminants browse just a little bit differently, and maybe prefer some broadleaves over grasses first. However, on grasses, they will eat from the top down when they start to consume grass. So if the grass is too short, well, that animal, let's just say it's a stock or calf, they're going to, you're just going to waste too much energy trying to get a mouthful of grass if the grass is too short. Okay. And then opposite of that is if it's too tall, well, we're gonna waste a lot. We're gonna trample it. So if it is too mature, obviously palatability goes down, but it's also gonna be wasted through trampling too.
That's exactly right. And really what we look at is basically when the plant starts to grow reproductive. It's a natural thing. I mean, all plants are going to try to, or they're going to do it at some point. Some are faster, some are later. And what we're going to try to go through here in this webinar is how to maximize each acre of your pasture, whether it's through species or through management practices, and trying to keep them heading out and going reproductive at a different time, so we can utilize each area a little bit differently.
Yep. Okay, so to give you some guidelines and why species differ, warm season tall grasses, mainly our C4 grasses like big blue and Indian and switchgrass. These are the ones that I would say they're definitely more finicky as far as how tight we can graze them. We don't want to graze them any shorter than 6 inches, and we want to make sure that we've got a foot of growth before we start grazing them. The big blue and Indian, or even switchgrass, they will get to be 4 or 5 foot tall, but we don't want them that tall when we start grazing them too. So it's probably that 18 to 24 inches when we're going to start grazing these warm season grasses, and then we're going to back off of them if we graze them down to 6 inches and let them start to regrow. They do have a longer rest period than our cool season grasses, or especially our introduced cool season grasses. So when it's hot and they're growing fast, obviously we can get back to them sooner. So they're only going to require about a 20-day rest period. And then obviously if it's cool, they're growing slower, we need to stay off for them probably about 40 days. Okay. If it's cool season grasses, these are ones that, they're going to grow really, really fast right now. End of May here right now into June, they're going gangbusters, especially with some rain here right now. And so it's time to start getting after a lot of those. We're probably at 6, 8 inches on those, so we can start grazing them. We can be a little bit harder on them because their persistence is better, and so we can graze them down to 4 inches. Right now, it's important to remember that it's okay to move fast. And so because they're going to bounce back, it's like if we could really hit them hard, graze them down to 4 inches and move on to the next paddock before it gets too mature, we're going to keep those continuing to regrow and keep them in the highest quality state before they go reproductive. Okay. And then certainly some of the examples here are going to be like tough forage fescue, orchard grass, perennial ryegrass, meadow fescue would be another one on there, Italian ryegrass. Then your short grasses, these are ones that, especially like Kentucky bluegrass comes to mind, especially here. And I think even smooth brome or crested wheatgrass probably fits into this category, where they're never going to get too tall. And so, you're going to have to start grazing them earlier anyways. And a lot of these are going to spread through rhizomes. And so, they're going to grow back from the root itself. And so they don't need as much biomass above ground to go through the photosynthesis process that Alex talked about. So since they're going to grow back from the roots, we can graze them pretty tight, and they're still going to spread and still going to regrow and bounce back.
Yep, I agree with all
that. Okay, so that's probably the overarching concepts of grasses and how they're going to regrow.
And if Justin, if you don't mind, I maybe skipped over that a little quick, the photosynthesis. And so like grasses they're not like alfalfa, where alfalfa can grow through the crown, which is like either at or just below the soil surface. Grasses need leaf tissue to be able to grow. So however many growing points a grass has is going to be however many points are coming off of the leaf. So the more leaf structure we can keep showing, the faster grass will grow. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just figured I'd add that in before we got too deep into this. Yeah.
All right. So since we have a pretty good basic understanding of the grasses and how they're growing, I think it's time to go on to rotational grazing systems, right? So we'll talk through the principles of it, why it matters, show some comparisons to continuous grazing systems, and then talk through a lot of the implementation of it, like actually designing some of these systems, figuring out your stocking rate, your rest period, and doing the math to get to those calculations we need. And then really it comes down to figuring out why it makes sense from a profitability standpoint. All right, so really, I mean, rotational grazing in its simplicity is just grazing only one portion of an entire pasture for a limited amount of time. So it's just sectioning off that area, grazing that, and then obviously we're gonna move on to the next and next and next. But what that does is it allows you to rest and recover those other paddocks that you are not grazing. And rest and recovery, we're gonna hit this a ton throughout this webinar, is the most important thing to allowing your grasses to become healthy. All right, so comparing it to a continuous grazing system, obviously with a continuous grazing system, it's pretty easy, right? Really low labor requirement. We can turn out cows right now and go get them in September, October. However big of an area. Really simple, really low labor requirement, okay? It does allow the livestock to be pretty selective. And so I think it just, you know, as far as that cow or that sheep, whatever it is, they can just go, okay? They don't have to count or rely on you moving them to the next one. I mean, I think there's some contentment that comes with that, but typically they're not content still.
Right. Especially as the summer goes on.
Yeah.
That's what we start to see.
Yeah.
I mean, everything starts out just fine because plenty of feed, plenty of growth. It's just fine. But then 2 or 3 weeks later, that's when we start to see differences start to show up. And we'll hit on that more in like the economics part.
Well, I think what you're saying there is what we tend to see is if they're allowed to graze the entire pasture for the whole entire grazing period, we see a lot of selection happen.
Exactly.
And when we get selection in certain areas, we get overgrazed areas, which is going to hurt our grass in the long run too.
Yep. And let weeds come in, it just causes problems later on. So,
and if we're not allowing that rest and recovery, we're never going to see the full potential of that grass. And so obviously we get the lowest yield potential from that grass.
That's exactly right. Yep.
If we're rotational grazing, we know that we're going to increase our stocking rate. We will have to use more management and able to do that. It's going to take us, you know, physically going out into that pasture, moving them from one paddock to the other. We're going to have some fencing and watering costs into that. So it is a higher initial investment in order to do this, just from an infrastructure standpoint. But we won't have selective grazing at all. We're going to control exactly where, when, and how long they can graze that area. And so plant health increases. And one of the really cool things I think is our manure distribution gets way, way better.
Absolutely. And not only does our plant health increase, but we also see our livestock health increase through this also, which is a huge thing to keep in mind. You know?
So when we get better manure distribution, we have way better, our nutritional needs of our plants are met.
Yep.
And so, you know, they're not just going back to the one corner of the fence or that one watering hole, laying there in the heat of the summer, and then, you know, defecating in that one spot all the time, then going on grazing. You move them to the paddock, then you're going to the next one, then you're going to the next one. And Alex mentioned animal health being a benefit from this. Not only is it better because we can control the quality of the grazing from the grass, but we're typically moving away from manure.
Absolutely.
And so parasite loads become lower too.
Yep.
And
health.
Yes,
absolutely. And we don't have to deal with hoof rot nearly as much, it seems like. And there's a lot of benefits towards the animal health side of things that, I mean, just being in a less confined area for a longer duration of time. I mean, we see lots of benefits from it.
Right on. Okay. So there are various intensity of grazing systems. And I think it all comes down to the, you know, the labor you do have, the resources you have to set up more paddocks. Anytime we do this, obviously with the more intensity, we get more paddocks. And the more paddocks we have shorter grazing intervals. But when we have more paddocks, we have longer rest periods for each paddock.
Yeah, it goes back to that mob grazing type of mentality. where we try to take as much off as one time, or as the time allows for, and then let that rest for as much as time allows for. So I mean, it's you give and you take is kind of what it comes down to.
All right. So we'll talk about that quality grazing and why you would or would not aim for that as a goal. But through this, we can do various things like reclamation by how long we're grazing, where we're grazing, and then we'll talk about actually getting set up with some of these systems in place. Okay, so we've mentioned grazing length already. Obviously, with a short rotation, we're going to do this in order to gain the best quality nutritionally from our grasses. Okay, so imagine this. It's what is it? May 24th. May 24th, we turn out cows, grasses, 8-10 inches tall. The very first thing they're going to do is eat as much as they can.
Yep.
Right. They're going to spread out, eat. Okay. They're going to eat the highest quality grasses they can.
Yep.
Every time we move, they're going to want to do that. So when we have short grazing intervals, we're going to allow that animal to eat the highest quality first.
And the most of it too.
Most of it.
Yeah.
And when we keep that grass at that vegetative stage like we want, we know that plant is also in its highest quality stage. So that short rotation will help with that, plus monitoring your grass maturity stage will also ensure that. If we're aiming for a long rotation, or a long grazing length, I should say, this is we can use this anytime we want to change the landscape. So this is where I think mob grazing kind of comes into play. A lot of times we can use mob grazing to really change species diversity. So right now, let's say we're in Blackhawk, South Dakota, and we've got a pasture that's really invaded with crested wheatgrass. However, it's native pasture, native sod, never been broken. One of the practices folks will do is they'll overgraze that crested wheatgrass early in the spring to try to set it back. Okay, so since it's growing right now, we can really hit it hard, and then we can get off of it in the time where warm seasons are going to want to start to grow, which is likely the middle of June. And so by setting that crested wheatgrass back, we now just gave an opportunity to grow for big blue, side oats, blue gravel, waffle grass, whatever's out there in that seed bank that could come then. By doing this, though, we're allowing, or not allowing, but ensuring that we're keeping the livestock in that area for a long period of time. We're going to force them to eat whatever's there.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to force them to grub it down too. Where like crested wheatgrass, that's a grass that breaks dormancy super fast in the spring. And so that's the time to get out there. If that's what we're trying to control, is crested wheatgrass or smooth brome around here too. That's the time to get out there. I mean, we can push or dent that population now, so we can hopefully influence the warm seasons that should come later on. So knowing the plant cycles and the majority of plants that you have out there is probably the best way to interpret this practice.
Yep. I think it's kind of fun to think about. Most all of our pastures probably haven't been farmed.
Yep.
I mean, what's left of a pasture now? It just, there's no way, well, not no way, but more than likely it hasn't been, if it hasn't been farmed right now, there's been.
Yeah.
So a lot of that is native prairie, native sod. And so our seed bank of, a really diverse mixture of warm and cool season species is there. However, like in Brookings County, let's just say most of those grasses or most of our pastures are dominated by smooth brome grass. When we're not getting off of that grass, we never allow what is there really express itself.
Yeah.
So in continuous grazing systems, when we just turn things out there and let them be, they're probably going to be eating some of those warm seasons that are actually growing, but we never see them. And they just keep getting set back because the big blue stem gets up, gets growing middle of June, through July. It's never going to actually go to a reproductive stage because it's getting grazed down all the time. And that just sets it back, sets it back, sets it back.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that we ever give a chance to come is the smooth brome.
Because that's early. Yep, exactly. the thing to keep in mind here too is, I mean, we have a natural seed bank. And I mean, obviously we sell seed for a living, but like there's natural seed out there. So we can improve the landscape back to like its natural habitat just through grazing practices.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty fun thing to think about, actually.
Yep, it really is. All right. Okay, so this is a really, really simple math problem here, I guess. But really what we're looking for is based off of your rest period, we want to try to figure out how many paddocks you'll actually need. And so if you think back to what type of grasses you have in your pasture or paddocks, and you know that you're going to have 20 days of rest, well, 20 days of rest with 5 days of grazing per animal group, you're going to get about 5 paddocks is what you would need to separate that pasture off into.
Yep. Yep. Pretty simple math, I guess. And we hope to go through all this math here kind of as we have everything all encompassed, but this is really what it all comes down to, is setting up what you're trying to accomplish. So like this problem here, we're just trying to accomplish how many paddocks do we need. Later on, we're going to come up with how many animals per paddock can we have. But first, we just have to make sure that we know how long we need to let them rest for.
Yep.
Because that's ever so important.
Yep.
With all rotation grazing systems.
And when we first started this webinar, we talked about, things are growing really, really fast right now. So a short rest period is beneficial right now.
Yeah.
Okay, if we get stressed from drought, then we want to lengthen that rest period. We want to stay off of that. It's kind of common sense, but when that happens and we're short on feed, it's hard to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always, I think the biggest takeaway from this is you want to follow the weather, follow your grass conditions, not necessarily the calendar, so maybe the days aren't so important, but watch your grass before coming back to it.
That's exactly right.
And allowing for that rest period to be right. Okay, so now we're gonna figure out what paddock size should be. Obviously, you have to have enough forage in that one paddock to meet the intake of that livestock. And so through all these calculations, we're gonna use 0.04 as a figure to multiply by. And you're going to see this in the next few slides, but 0.04 accounts for your daily intake, which is 2.5% of its body weight.
Yep.
And then 0.5% just from loss of trampling, and then a 1% buffer. So we're going to add that all up, and it's going to eat 0.04 is what that should be. Oh no, that's right. It is 1% buffer. Sorry, 3.5 plus 0.5.
Yeah,
4.
Yeah.
Hard.
Yeah.
All right. So a 1,200 pound cow times 0.4, we're gonna assume that she's gonna use 48 pounds.
Right. Yep. And I mean, only what, 2.5% of that is actually consumed.
Correct.
Yep. And trampling is not a bad thing in this scenario. I mean, that provides soil cover and fertilizer, mulch, all that, whatever you want to call it, for protecting the ground, which is going to help our grasses and pasture species regrow. So don't take that as a bad thing. It's just a natural thing that's always going to happen. But yeah, so she's going to use up that one cow 48 pounds per day.
Yep. And we're going to get to a slide here where we're kind of mapping out how this looks. Nobody has a perfectly square field. Everybody probably has some sort of water structure in their pasture to fence around or through or utilize, and so obviously our paddock size is going to differ from one to the other, and so then your grazing interval on each paddock will also vary slightly as well too.
Yeah.
But this too is a really easy calculation. Your paddock size is simply going to equal your acres of pasture divided by your number of paddocks.
Yep.
Okay. I don't think we needed to describe that one too. Okay. Now we're going to estimate acres though, and this is where we put some of those figures into place that we just figured out. We want to know how many acres total do we need. Okay, so I used a sheep example. So let's say we got 100 ewes. If you got 100 ewes that weigh 200 pounds each, We're gonna take that by that 0.04,
Yep.
right? Their use. And then we're gonna times that by the total days that we want to graze. So 120 is pretty standard in this area anyways.
Yeah, it is.
June,
Yeah.
July, August, September.
And then
4
hopefully
months.
we can go to corn stalks.
Right, yeah, we got some crop residue to go. over
Yeah.
there. Okay, then we're gonna divide that by our average yield per acre. So most of our pastures here in the upper Midwest are gonna yield about 3 tons per acre.
Yep, really close to that.
So 3 tons is about 6,000 pounds, okay? So we do that calculation and we get about 16 acres. 16 acres is what we need for 100 ewes.
Yep. Or you could graze, what was it? 6.25 ewes per 1 acre for the entire time.
And there's our top one, right?
Yep, that's exactly right. So again, pretty simple math, but by all means, if we lose you at all, we're happy to go back.
And I think I mean, the most difficult thing about this is just understanding the calculation in terms of what to use and for units and what the
Exactly.
figure is. So,
Yep, just keep your units straight.
okay. So we want to do one more example. I think it's worth doing here. Alex is going to get on the whiteboard.
Yep.
Alex, our banner.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, if you guys can't see this, please let us know. Justin, I'm having a hard time reading it.
All right. Determine the pasture acreage for the season.
Yes, okay, so we're total actual question is number of acres. All right, can you see that? Probably not. That's all right. There's no numbers to it. But to begin with, we have to estimate the yield that we're gonna have per acre. So for this scenario, obviously the sheet here says 4,000 pounds per acre, which is fairly standard too. Maybe a little lower in like more likely in lower rainfall climates. But our total is 4,000 pounds per acre. All right, so then from there, we are going to estimate the number of days that we want to graze for. And so for this scenario, we're going from middle of May to the middle of October, which is fairly standard also. So we're going for 153 days. The last scenario, we were what, 120?
Yep.
I think, yep. So not only is the lighting probably not helping us see the whiteboard, but my writing probably isn't helping either.
Beautiful.
And then we're gonna go with the estimated weight per animal. And so we're talking about this earlier, Justin. What's your opinion now? And should we include, if it's pairs, should we include the cow and the calf? Or just the cow herself, if she's gonna be consuming more? What's our thoughts here?
I would use the cow plus some weight.
I agree with you. Because the calf is going, as it grows too, it's gonna be consuming more and more.
Correct.
But on top of that too, it's trampling some too.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think we should do that. So on here, we say 1,000 pounds for a beef cow.
That's a little bit.
That's a little low. I think we should adjust that. What do you think?
I'd say
1,400?
1,600.
16? Okay.
Yeah. Most cows are probably 1,250, 1,300. Or calves at least 300 pounds probably.
All right. So then from there, we are going to take our number of animals that we can graze on our pasture. So like the example says here, we have 20 acres. And we're gonna mess up the number a little bit from what the sheet says, because we have 1,600 pounds instead of 1,000 here. We have 20 acres times our total, our tonnage here.
Per acre. Yep.
Yeah, 4,000 pounds. And here's where keeping your labels straight is probably gonna help. And then we're gonna divide that by 0.04, which is our usage. Multiply it by our 1,600. And
Total days graze.
total days grace, 153. I don't have a calculator on me, Justin, would you mind?
You're gonna have to do that in your head.
Yeah.
It's gonna be 80,000.
All right. 80,000 divided by
97.92.
97.92. And that is
8.16.
8.16. All right, perfect. And so that gives us the, that gives us a stocking rate, isn't it? Yep.
Number of animals.
Yep. Perfect. And I know that got way longer than what we anticipated. But hopefully you guys are following along and doing it for your own farm or your own ranch, and you're able to calculate how many, like what your guys' stocking rate is, or you believe it to be on your own pasture.
All right. Okay, so understanding how to do that probably gives you a good idea of either how many pasture acres you need or how many head of livestock you can utilize on the pasture that you currently have.
Yep.
I think it's good to understand if this makes sense economically or not. And SDSU actually had done this study, and it's a pretty good look at a short term, which is 5 years, and a long term 30-year profitability comparison of using rotational grazing with high costs, like going out there and buying all new things, the very best equipment as far as fencing materials, high labor and all that, and low costs, and then comparing that to a continuous grazing system. And I guess, you know, at the start of it, there's not much difference.
There is, yeah, there's no difference really.
As you increase your size and as you lengthen the time that you do this, that's when we start to see the rotational grazing system really stand out and actually start to become way more economically viable than a continuous grazing system.
That's exactly. And this only takes into consideration like 1 year. So, I mean, if we implement this year after year after year, obviously that's dollars in our pocket, and that's what we're ultimately after.
Yep.
So, I mean, this is just shows what a difference can make. And I mean, you can go as deep into the weeds as you want to do it, whether it's with fencing, new water, however you want to set your pastures up. But even little steps can certainly help.
All right, that's my favorite slide. Fencing. We're going to go through how do we actually, you know, go about getting some rotational grazing supplies, comparing some of that stuff just a little bit, and then kind of drawing out what it looks like as far as that paddock system. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if we had a rectangle field, it would be really, really easy to take a perimeter fence and simply, you know, put some high tensile wires around here, or maybe it's a 3-strand barb with 1 high tensile on it. Whatever it is, let's make sure that we have something to connect our cross fences on to make it hot. Okay. We usually want a perimeter fence to be stronger than just a 1-strand poly wire. And so that's why we have this nice perimeter good fence as a permanent fence. Okay. If we do that, let's say we have this perfect rectangle field. It works really simple to run a water line right down the middle and then come back and stick our poly wires. Maybe it's a 1-strand poly wire and come across it. We got divided in perfectly equal 8 paddocks, easy to calculate, easy to figure, and we can move around it this way. Okay. It's not always that easy. Okay. It's not going to be because it's just not realistic. However, use this as a pretty good guide as far as how you want to set up. The things to remember are, let's have a perimeter fence that we have at least some hot wire going around so that we can always connect onto. Makes it simple to just, you know, either you're connecting your handle on or you're jumping a wire onto your reel and making your cross poly fence hot that way. This too, it seems like we can, if we've got a water line here or we've got a creek here, whatever it may be, we've got a water source running through all these paddocks. I think it's really simple if we got a water line to go ahead and just connect onto each one of these paddocks with a portable tank. I've seen some people start up here with a tank and then whether it's hose or plastic poly hose, I guess. Yeah. Take that tank and then drag it as you come along. That works really well too. Either way is fine.
Well, and you did this, Justin, right? I've been to Justin's place before, and he's got a very nice rotational grazing setup. And you want to just go over like how you, because yours is pretty similar to this, isn't it?
It is. It is similar to this, where we have we've got a permanent water line above ground here, and then we put shut-off connected valves on each paddock. And so we'll just grab a tank that has a float on it, and we'll connect on to each paddock. So we are physically moving that tank from one to the next, but we have a connection at each point too. Okay. It's pretty popular to have these pinwheel systems too, where we just have a tank in the middle and then we'll pinwheel out from there. I guess the one, the negative thing from that is that you always have that centralized area that's going to be overgrazed when they're coming back from water. Whereas a system like this, where you're moving the water, you're going to change that.
Right. Yeah. Neither are bad, but yeah.
All right. I think it's fun I actually really enjoy fencing supplies. And so it's kind of fun to search out some of the different options for these. The way to compare fencers or energizers is to compare them based off of their joules, so their joule output. And I actually read this today where your joules, you should think of it as like horsepower, right? A joule is what requires to push your voltage through the fence. You'll see different mile ratings on fencers or energizers, or different acre allotments, like this energizer is good for 40 acres, or this energizer is good for 10 miles of fence. Mm-hmm. It's I don't know, that's okay, but really joules is what's going to determine the power of that fencer. And it's really important when we start having fences that have debris on it, where they got to go through a lot of grass or a low area, or they're touching trees, branches, debris, something that's going to start pulling that energy down. Then you want a fencer energizer with a lot of joules to push through that, lots of horsepower to push it. You do need probably 3,000 volts or 3.0 kilovolts on your meter system if you've got a handheld voltage checker. In order to keep it in livestock, okay? They're not going to respect it if it's down in the ones. They won't. I mean, they might get a shock, but most of the times they're gonna go right through it. It's not properly shocking them. There are lots of different types of energizers in terms of how they're powered. Obviously, the most consistent is going to have, going to be your 110 volt plug-in energizer. However, it's not portable at all, and you have to have some sort of structure to plug it in. You gotta have an outlet, okay? But that is the best. That's the standard, okay? If that's just not an option, you can move to something that's got a 12 volt DC battery. I like that because you can, that you have a charged battery. If your battery is charged, your fencer is working, okay? The downfall is that you're going to be changing batteries. In the winter, your battery use goes faster when it's really, really cold. Or there's solar ones that can charge batteries at the same time. And so if you've got a fencer or an energizer that is far away and it's hard to change consistently for batteries, that's probably a pretty good option, is getting the solar panel one on there.
And they got some power too.
Yeah. Their joule output is pretty good, especially when they've got the batteries on there too, and they can go to the battery source when they don't have enough solar power.
Yeah, sunlight. So with that too, Justin, I got a question kind of going off of like power, and what do you recommend for how many hot wires to do on these rotation grazing systems where you're probably getting a little bit more traffic towards that leading edge?
I think it's important to have 3 as a perimeter. Mm-hmm. If you've got really young little calves and you're concerned about them going to the next paddock, then you need 2 as a cross fence.
Yeah.
A lot of times, I don't think it matters if the calf goes ahead of them. They're not going to stray away from mom. And as long as mom's staying in with one, I just do one.
Yep.
If you're using it for sheep or goats,
Oh, we need 3.
probably need 3. If you've got well-trained ones, you can get by with 2.
Yep. I would agree. But that's just a common question that people have. And yeah, usually when we're rotation grazing, our pasture quality is high enough that we don't see a lot of pressure right on that leading edge. Yeah, and that's why it always helps to back fence too. I guess we haven't mentioned that, to keep them from going back to areas that they haven't, or that they've already grazed. But yeah, and usually, I mean, 1-2 wires would be great there, but
yeah,
that leading edge is going to be where it sees the most stress.
Yep. And it's usually they're waiting for you. You know, as your cows get trained to this, they're really well behaved until they see you. And so you'll see that where, you know, if you're working in your Ranger or 4-wheeler next to your cows and you're not moving them, but they hear that Ranger or 4-wheeler coming,
yep,
they're going to get antsy. And so I think, I don't know, it's just something to keep in mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I think it becomes really important to get efficient with this system so that you continue to want to do it. The more you do it, the longer you do it, the more efficient you'll get. The most important thing you could do is go buy a fence tester. Gallagher makes one, Kenco's makes one. There's a few out there, but it's simply a handheld metering system that you're going to put onto your wire, and it's going to measure the amount of volts that are going through it. It's going to measure the amount of amps. The amps is telling you where it's being drawn down. It'll have an arrow pointing if it's shorted out in an area, which way that short is coming from and where you're drawing your amps from. And like I said, obviously it's going to tell you your amount of kilovolts that it's putting out. So if it says 3.0, you've got 3,000 volts coming through that fence. And then stick your poly wire on a geared reel. The geared reels, that ratio, a lot of them are like 3 to 1. And so, you know, it's wiring, or it's rolling faster than what your hand is spinning.
Exactly. Yep.
And then go buy some nice, good step-in post. Either the pigtail post, if you're just doing a 1 strand, or like the picture on the bottom left there, those step-in plastic posts where you've got multiple inserts for that poly wire. Those are really slick if you're going to run more than 1 poly wire.
Yep.
All right. I wanted to list this up here. If you're not familiar with a lot of these rotational grazing supplies, these companies, they're all good. It seems like each one of them kind of has their niche as far as their specialty or what they do best. But I believe it's extremely important to go buy quality wire. The braided poly wire with mixed metal is going to give you the best current through that wire. It's going to hold up the longest too. And then, you know, the quality of the step-in post is going to matter too. If you think this is just going to be a 1-year deal, well, then go buy the cheapest thing you can possibly do. But if you want to stick with it for a few years, you'll get what you pay for in this scenario.
Absolutely. And the thing to keep in mind here too is, I mean, like, these things are in the elements all the time. So whether it's rain, wind, sun is terrible on some stuff. But that's one thing that quality definitely goes a long ways. Yep. And it fixes a lot of headaches for later on.
Yeah. Get set up right for it, and you'll save yourself a lot of headaches. Yeah. Okay, so that kind of goes to the implementation of it. We're talking just a little bit about improving your pasture, and we can do this by introducing other species if we think they're needed in there, and we're going to talk about how to actually do it, the seeding methods that are used. So I think there are 2 classes or 2 ways to do this. We can go the native route, and these are our native grasses that are common in our area. Okay, so we've mentioned these before. Most of the time, or if we're going a native route, we're typically more interested in warm season grasses, and a warm season pasture is really important in a drought plant, I think. Mm-hmm. They're way more drought tolerant, they're hardier, they're longer lived. They don't quite have the regrowth as the cool season introduced grasses. Yep. They're not as persistent. And I guess the downfall to them is they're slower to establish. Yeah. We're going to be out, you know, 1.5 years, maybe 2 years from planting to use when we're using a native pasture mix. But once you plant them and you get them established, they are there forever.
Exactly. And they produce a lot of forage when usually our cool seasons are not producing nearly as much.
Yes. Exactly.
So that's a huge benefit.
Yeah. If we're looking at putting in introduced species, either as overseeding or starting brand new, these ones they establish quick, right? The germination period is quicker. I mean, they germinate in 7 to 14 days usually. This is something that when we're moving through these and we're rotationally grazing on introduced grasses like orchards and perennial ryegrass, timothy, these grasses are really high quality in the vegetative state. And so a lot of times, like grass-based dairy systems, they love orchard grasses and perennial rye, meadow fescue, because they can rotationally graze on these. They can move their cows and maintain that vegetative state on these grasses and get really high milk returns per acre on these. They will be shorter lived, and so it's something that we'll have to reseed, and we'll probably have to fertilize them if it's just grasses. We don't have legumes with them. They love nitrogen.
Absolutely.
But they'll perform with it too.
Yep. So it's just all things to keep in mind how you want to use it. What do you want it to look like too? I mean, I'll be honest, I think a native pasture looks really cool. I mean, a lot of diversity out there, sees what the landscape truly used to look like, but it's all about pros and cons to each of them. And we may get the question too, what about a blend of each? And what's your thought on that, Justin?
Yeah, if we're gonna mix and match introduced with native species, we want to make sure that we've got enough native species in there that can take hold, and through proper management, we can keep them. But we've got to get them there. And so if we have too many introduced grasses that are going to get established before our natives do, it's probably not worth putting in the natives if we're not right too. So make sure you start with enough that can take hold, get established of the big blue Indian, grama grasses, and then you can dabble with a few of the introduced cool seasons. Maybe a little bit of intermediate or pubescent wheatgrass work pretty good with some natives. But I wouldn't go crazy with things that are extremely invasive with a native planting. So your bromes and bluegrasses, they don't mesh well with those.
No, and the thing to keep in mind too is if you continuously graze, probably not the best idea.
I'd agree.
Yeah, because our critters are just gonna browse them warm seasons right as they're coming out of dormancy, like early June timeframe, and they're not going to get enough energy and enough vigor to them throughout the year to really push them through and get a lot of forage off.
Yeah, exactly right. All right, so methods to go about this. I think there are two really good windows. The frost seeding window. This is typically in late fall, early winter, probably late November, early December, when we're freezing and thawing and we're getting snow. And so that's the time when you would want to do it. I would use this method if your pasture is really hilly, really rocky, you can't get a drill through it and you're going to have to broadcast it, then do it as a frost seeding. And it seems like this time also works best for our legumes. So if you're frost seeding clovers or grazing alfalfa, vetches, they have a nice hard dense seed, and that'll sit out there until it warms up and be safe.
Yep.
So that's how I would do a frost seeding.
Yeah, with that too, we often get the question, what percentage of legumes can I grow without having to worry about bloat or anything like that? And I mean, that's all diet relative. So I mean, obviously don't turn them out on an empty stomach, all that kind of stuff. But safely, I like to say about 30%.
I think that's a good number.
Max.
Yep.
Legumes.
Yep. And the more they get acclimated to it, the more they can handle.
Exactly. But if we're just going to turn them off blind, 30% seems to be about it.
Yep. So the other time that works really well to overseed pastures and improve the quality of it would be in the fall. And I say this because typically at that time of year, what we are grazing, we've probably suppressed. And so we want to seed right after we've grazed that area, just so that we don't get that existing competition from the grasses that are there. And this, I would say, is going to happen, especially up here in South Dakota, is going to happen in usually September. And so we can run in there with a no-till drill. And at that time of year, since we're cooling off for the year, it's probably going to be best to use cool season grasses. At that time of year, we're pretty cold for warm seasons to actually germinate and grow. And so it would be more like a dormant seeding if we were going to use any other warm season species at that time.
Yep, exactly.
Perfect. So we're getting pretty close here as far as time. I think it's good to reiterate that, this rotational grazing system, it's one big system. And if you've heard me talk about other concepts that we promote, it's always thinking about this farm as one big system, right? We want to manage it as a whole. And so anytime that we can manage that pasture right, we know that we're going to get healthy grass. And you know that when your grass is good, your cows are healthy too, your calves are healthy. Things work right and they work in balance. And if we've got healthy cows, well, we are doing better too. We're healthier, we're happier, profitability is better. So it all comes back and it all fits into that one big whole system.
Yeah, and I know we've mentioned grass a lot. I mean, these same practices, they follow suit with annual cover crops.
Yeah,
all that kind of stuff. So I mean, it's all about take some, give some. And like we probably had on a slide prior, don't grade or don't change and move your cows and your paddocks based off the calendar. Do it off what the plans tell us.
Yeah, good point. Perfect. With that, thanks for hopping in and listening. We did record this and are going to stick it up on YouTube as well. And so if you missed something and you want to go back through one of those calculations, feel free to do that. I think it's a good time to mention we're going to have some summer workshops going on, and would certainly invite you to come to those. They're going to happen at the end of June. So the topic or the program agenda it's called Carbon, Cattle, and Cover Crops. And so since this carbon talk is pretty hot right now, we thought it was a good idea to invite everybody out, talk on those carbon markets and give you an understanding of what those are. And then talk about the implementation of cover crops through those, as well as livestock integration on those acres.
Yeah.
All fitting into that same talk. So we're gonna go to Mitchell on the 27th of June, Sioux Center, Iowa on the 28th. We're gonna go to Morris on the 29th and Aberdeen on the 30th. And it's gonna be from 11:30 to 2:30. Feed you lunch. The program's free. We invite you to sign up, and we can do that. Did you post a?
Oh, I got a link.
Alex is gonna post a link there
in the chat here.
There you go.
Yeah.
But we're also gonna put it up on our Facebook account as well, and we'll have a Eventbrite sign up that you can go to. So with that, does anybody else have any questions? You can certainly post them on the chat if you do.
You bet. And those, maybe you did mention it. These other workshops, they're going to be broadcasted on. Yeah, you did just mention that. All through this Eventbrite or YouTube or anything like that. So if you're not able to make it, be sure to get caught up. Yeah. Okay. There's no other questions. I know I'd answered a couple throughout, but yeah, I don't know. It was fun. It's a fun thing to talk about. I mean, restoring and helping the planet that we live on. Every little bit matters. What do you think, Justin?
Very good.
Yeah. So with that, I want to thank you guys.
Yep, our emails are up there for free to email. Give us a call at that number too.
Will you be doing more like these webinars this summer?
Yeah, so we're gonna have webinars, quite a few of these. We did one a few weeks ago, and then we've got some more scheduled. So if you enjoy these, we're gonna have timely topics that are pertinent to raising livestock and growing forage and cover crops. And so we'll have those come out here throughout the year. We'll probably do at least a half a dozen of them throughout the year.
Yeah, and all of them will be able to be watched back, whether it's through YouTube or some other link. We'll be sure to let you guys know. But yeah, there are more to come.
Great question.
Yeah. All right.
Cool.
So with that,
Well, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate your time.
thanks, guys. Give us a call if you got any questions.